Hey, so in this lesson, you're going to learn the width tool. So if you find that on the tools panel and click and hold on to it, there's a bunch of different ones on here. And if you've ever used Photoshop liquify effect, we have pucker, bloat. It's kind of similar in some ways, but in other ways it's not at all the same. In liquifying Photoshop, you're editing pixels, of course. In Illustrator, we're just adjusting shapes, vector artwork, illustrations, points and paths in between. So go ahead and just select the width tool, and we don't have a shaper though to edit, right? So it's not going to do anything. So you need to draw something first. So you can just draw out a circle, for example. And so then when you have the width tool, notice that this has a stroke and a fill. If it has no stroke, like if it's set to none, like that, and if I click on the path, or if I click on the fill, nothing happens, right? It's not, it doesn't have any effect. So if I do add a stroke color, and then I set it to, let's just set it to something a little bit thicker. And then now what the width tool does is if you have a design here, say you're making a logo and you want just the width of the stroke here to be larger, but just on one area, you can click and drag it out and see it'll actually make it larger like so. So it almost looks like an olive. Or maybe an eye in a cartoon illustration. So that's the width tool. I don't use it too often. There's a couple other ones though that might be useful, just depending on what you're designing, whether it's an infographic or a logo and whatnot. The warp tool is basically you just select it and then click and drag, and you can just slightly adjust. That's kind of like one of the liquify effects in Photoshop. So it's kind of similar in that way, but we're not dealing with pixels per se. In the file, at least, on the screen, obviously it's displayed as pixels, but it's points and paths in between, so it is vector. So you can slightly adjust curves, and if you're wanting to create some kind of custom shape, in say you're making a logo for a company, this is one way to do that, to kind of play around and adjust the shape. So the twirl tool is kind of interesting. You can click and drag, and it'll actually twirl these shapes out, or it'll twirl them in like so. So it just depends on what you're trying to create. It can really get out of hand here, obviously. If you want to customize it, you can double click it, and then there are some settings here. So if you don't want to twirl this way, you want to twirl the other way, you can have the rate at which it twirls, higher or lower. And then you can also change the width and the height of the brush that we're using, and also the angle. So I'm going to start over with another shape here, ellipse tool again. So the twirl tool, I think you can stylize shapes. If you use it subtly, I think it's a little bit better. If you're creating some kind of ornate design, it may be kind of useful in illustrations. You can also go to the pucker tool. What does that do? Well, it depends on where the center of the tool is. So if it's right here, it's going to pull it out like that, or it's going to pucker it in like that. So depending on if you're outside of a shape or the inside of the shape, but the pucker just puckers it in, and then bloat tool actually just bloats it out. So if I'm on the outside, if the center area is on the outside, it's going to bloat out from there, and if it's on the inside, it'll bloat it out like so to the shape of the brush. So the scallop tool, it's just going to stylize the edge a little bit. It's going to pull it in or pull it out. And you can also try the crystallize tool, kind of similar to it. And then also the wrinkle tool is just going to roughen the edge a little bit. So if you're drawing some illustrations and you want to just stylize the edge, these can be kind of useful. In the outlining text tutorial, I'll show you quickly how to use twirl tool, showing you how you can use that in text. So check that one out as well. I'll see you in the next lesson.